The delivery man who saved an elderly woman from a burning house thought he would be forgotten. One day later, the surprise that awaited him at the door left him speechless. Michael parked his delivery van near the curb. The street was quiet, with large houses and trimmed hedges. He turned off the engine and rubbed his eyes. It was late afternoon, and he had one last package to deliver before heading home. He reached over the passenger seat and picked up a small cardboard box with a label showing the address across the street. He got out of the van, feeling his shirt cling to his back. Sweat trickled down his neck. The air felt hot, and he noticed a smell that seemed off. He looked around. Something smelled like burning wood. He scanned the row of houses, neat lawns, and parked luxury cars, trying to find where it was coming from. Then he saw it. A thin line of dark smoke drifted upward from a house next door to his destination. He held the package under his arm and approached the gate of the property. The smell of smoke grew stronger. He heard a faint crackling sound. He paused, trying to confirm if it was real. He leaned forward and peered through a gap in the tall fence. Inside, he saw a brick house with large windows. Dark smoke rose from the roof. A voice called out from behind him. A man in a polo shirt stood a short distance away. "Hey, do you smell that?" "What's going on?" the man asked. "I'm not sure," Michael said. "It looks like something's on fire." The man shifted his weight, holding a rake. "I called the fire department. They said they're on their way." Michael stepped closer to the gate. He saw orange light flickering behind an upper window. "I think this is serious," he said. "I can see flames up there." The neighbor shook his head. "We should wait. The firefighters will handle it. You shouldn't be messing around. This is private property." Michael ignored the warning. He thought he heard something inside. A muffled voice, maybe. He pressed his ear to the fence. The wood felt warm. He looked around, hoping to see others rushing to help, but only saw a few people peeking from behind hedges or curtains. No one moved closer. "Do you hear anyone?" Michael asked the neighbor. The man shrugged. "I don't know, probably empty." Michael placed the package on the sidewalk. He could return it later. Now he needed to find a way inside. He walked along the fence until he found a latch. He lifted it and pushed the gate open. He stepped onto the driveway. He could hear distant voices, but no one approached. The smoke drifted thicker into the afternoon air. He reached the front door. It was a heavy wooden door, and it felt hot. He touched the handle and pulled away, cursing under his breath. Smoke seeped from the edges. He coughed, wiping sweat from his forehead. This place was burning fast. He circled around, looking for another entrance. A side door was locked and hot as well. "Hey, man!" The neighbor's voice came again, closer now. "Don't be stupid. The firefighters will handle it." Michael didn't respond. He saw a low window that might lead into a living area. He bent down and looked through the glass. It was clouded with smoke, making it hard to see inside. He pressed his face closer, squinting. He thought he could make out a sofa. He listened carefully and heard a faint sound, almost like a moan. "Is anyone inside?" Michael shouted. He banged on the window. His voice sounded muffled. The smoke grew thicker, irritating his lungs. He coughed, feeling a sharp pain in his chest. The window wouldn't open. He stepped back and spotted a small ceramic planter. He grabbed it, lifted it over his shoulder, and paused. He listened for any sound inside again. He thought he heard that weak moan, maybe someone trying to call out. He swung the planter hard against the window. The glass cracked, but stayed in place. He swung again, and this time it shattered, sending shards into the room. Smoke and heat poured out. Michael brushed away the broken glass with his forearm. The rush of hot air made him flinch, and he coughed hard. He leaned in and shouted, "Hello, I'm here!" He waited, not sure if anyone could hear him. He took a deep breath outside, then climbed in through the broken frame. He moved slowly, careful not to cut his legs on the jagged edges. Outside, the neighbor yelled, "What the hell are you doing? Get out of there! You're crazy!" Another voice shouted, "Just wait for the fire department!" Michael gritted his teeth, ignoring them. Inside, the room was filled with thick smoke. His eyes stung. He felt his lungs burn and his throat ached. He blinked, trying to see through the haze. He made out the shapes of furniture. A chair lay on its side. The heat was intense. He heard distant crackling, maybe part of the structure failing. He shouted again, "Is anyone here?" There was a cough, weak and broken, followed by a faint cry. He stepped carefully through the room, feeling the carpet under his feet. He didn't know what he was stepping on, but it felt damp and strange. He tried to ignore it and focused on that voice. From outside, he heard someone yell, "They're here!" Probably the firefighters arriving. He couldn't rely on them now. He was inside and had to act fast. He had to find whoever needed help before the fire trapped them both. He approached a doorway. The handle felt hot. He used the back of his hand to push it open and flinched at the heat. He stepped into a hallway choked with dark smoke. The ceiling paint peeled. He coughed and tried holding his breath as he moved forward. The voice came again, off to his left. He followed it, ignoring the heat against his skin. In the distance, he heard breaking glass and shouting voices. He knew he didn't have much time. He could leave now and save himself, but that thought made him angry at his own fear. There was a person inside who couldn't escape. He wouldn't turn back now. He pressed on, sweat running down his face. His chest felt tight. His legs trembled. He was afraid, but he kept going. He came here to help, and he wouldn't leave someone behind. He took another step forward, quietly. Michael moved deeper into the hallway. He kept one hand against the wall, trying to stay balanced. The smoke was thick now, and he could hardly see the floor in front of him. The heat forced him to squint. He coughed, pressing his other hand against his mouth and nose. He tried to breathe through the damp sleeve of his shirt, but it barely helped. Each inhale felt rough. His throat was sore, and his lungs hurt with every breath. He called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He waited, straining his ears. He heard a muffled wheeze from somewhere ahead. It sounded like someone who could barely speak. She might be close, maybe in a room just a few steps away. Outside, he heard distant voices yelling, but he couldn't understand what they said. They were telling him to get out, or maybe they were just shouting for help. The roar of the fire grew louder, filling his ears and making it hard to focus. He reached a closed door on his left. The door handle was warm, but not as hot as the front door. He turned it slowly and opened it a crack. More smoke rushed out. He coughed and leaned back, then pushed through and stepped inside. This room was darker. The windows must have been covered or blocked by curtains that hadn't yet burned away. He patted the air in front of him, feeling around so he wouldn't bump into anything. He tried calling out again, raising his voice as much as he could. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" A faint voice answered, "Here, please." It was weak and shaky, the voice of someone older. It sounded like it came from the far side of the room. He moved forward, knocking his shin against something low. It felt like a coffee table. He pushed it aside, careful not to lose his footing. Every second counted now. The smoke was getting worse, and he could feel the heat intensifying behind him. He heard the distant crack of something collapsing in another part of the house. Time was short. "Keep talking," Michael said. "I'm coming." The voice tried again. "Over here, I can't..." It broke off into a series of coughs. Michael followed the sound, stepping over debris. He reached out and touched something soft and heavy on the floor. He leaned down. It felt like a body. He gently placed a hand on what felt like a shoulder. He could make out an older woman's face in the dim light. Her eyes were half closed, and her hair, which was gray and loose, was damp from sweat. "I'm going to get you out," he said. "Can you stand?" She tried to speak, but only coughed again. He slipped an arm under her shoulders and tried to lift her. She was heavier than she looked. He struggled, and his arms shook with the effort. She tried to help, but her legs didn't seem to work right now. He managed to get her to sit upright, leaning her against his chest for a moment. Outside, through the broken window in the other room, he heard someone shout, "Do you see him? Is he still inside?" Another voice answered, "He's in there. I don't see him." Michael ignored them and focused on the woman. "I need you to hold on to me," he said quietly. "We have to move fast." He lifted her again, this time pulling her arm around his shoulder. She let out a weak moan, but she didn't resist. He stood, wobbling, and felt his legs protest. The floor underneath was hot, and he feared it might give way. They needed a way out. He couldn't go back through the hall if it was blocked by flames, but the same route might still be their best shot. He had come in through a window, but that window was in the next room. He remembered the layout. He had to go back out the door he came in, then cross the hall, then find that broken window. He couldn't risk wandering blindly through unfamiliar rooms. "Stay with me," he said. He guided the woman forward. She coughed and tried to move her feet. She muttered, "Can't breathe," and he nodded. He couldn't waste time with words now. He pushed open the door, letting in a draft of hotter air from the hallway. He blinked hard, tears streaming from his burning eyes. As they stepped back into the hallway, a portion of the ceiling further down groaned and cracked. He jerked his head toward the sound. A cloud of sparks and bits of wood rained down. He raised an arm to shield her face, feeling embers land on his sleeve. He shook them off, gritting his teeth. "Almost there," he said. He hoped it was true. He headed toward the direction he came from, feeling along the wall. She leaned heavily on him, barely moving her feet. He tried to pick up the pace, but every step felt slower. The smoke pressed down on them. Through the smoke, he spotted a dim glow. That might be the room with the broken window. He hurried, dragging the old woman with him. Her breathing was shallow. He had to get her out now. "Hold on," he said. "We're close." He knew his voice probably sounded strained, and he wasn't sure if she could hear him clearly. But he had to say something. He had to keep her calm, or at least conscious. If she passed out, carrying her would be even harder. They crossed the threshold into the room where he had entered. Broken glass crunched under his shoes. He felt the slight breeze from outside. That was good. He headed toward it, ignoring the increasing heat at his back. It felt like the fire was spreading, eating through the walls behind them. He reached the window and looked out. He could see silhouettes of people on the lawn. A man in a blue shirt was shouting. Another figure pointed toward them. Michael tried to gauge the drop. It wasn't far, maybe a few feet. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his shoulder and leaned the old woman against the wall next to the window. "Hey," he shouted, trying to project his voice out to the people outside. "I've got someone here. Help me get her out." He coughed hard, almost losing his voice. The smoke was relentless. A voice answered from outside. "We see you. Pass her through." Michael turned to the old woman. "Ma'am, I need you to let me lift you through the window. There are people out there who will help." She nodded weakly, her eyes half closed. He put an arm under her knees and another around her back. He grunted and lifted her off the floor, stumbling closer to the window. He extended her toward the opening, careful to avoid the jagged edges of glass. Outside, a pair of arms reached in, grabbing her shoulders. Another set of hands grabbed her waist. With a coordinated effort, they pulled her out of Michael's arms and onto the lawn. He heard voices outside calling for medics and shouting instructions. With the old woman safe, Michael now had to get himself out. He grabbed the window frame, feeling the heat on his back. He could smell burnt fabric and hair. He hauled himself up, wincing as he scraped his leg on a broken shard. He swung one leg outside, then the other, and dropped onto the grass. As he hit the ground, his knees buckled. He coughed so hard that his chest ached. He looked up, trying to see the old woman. Paramedics were already kneeling beside her. He crawled closer, ignoring the pain in his arm and the stinging sensation on his shoulder. "Is she breathing?" he asked, voice cracking. A paramedic looked at him. "We've got her," he said. "She's alive. She needs oxygen. Stay back. We'll handle this." Michael nodded. He looked around. A few neighbors stood nearby. Some just stared at him. One man stepped forward, his face tight. "Where did you come from?" the man asked. Michael swallowed and coughed. "I'm just the delivery guy," he said. "I had a package. I saw the smoke." The man blinked and stepped back without another word. Michael sat on the grass, his head spinning. Firefighters rushed past him, dragging hoses and shouting orders. Water sprayed. The old woman lay a few feet away, an oxygen mask now pressed to her face. He could see her chest moving slightly. She was alive. That mattered. He rubbed his eyes, which still burned. He tried to breathe normally, but every breath rattled. He noticed someone staring at him, a neighbor who had warned him not to enter. The neighbor just looked at him, said nothing, then turned away. Michael wanted to check on the old woman again, but a paramedic blocked him, raising a hand. "You need to get checked out. You inhaled a lot of smoke. You might have burns. Come with me." Michael nodded. He tried to stand and stumbled. Another paramedic caught his arm. They walked him a short distance away, to the back of an ambulance. He sat on the edge, letting them dab at small burns on his forearm. He looked back at the house. Flames still flickered inside, but at least she was out. He wondered if anyone would remember what he did. Probably not. The firefighters would be the heroes, as they should be. He was just a delivery guy who jumped in without thinking. He lowered his head, coughed again, and said nothing more. Michael sat on the edge of the ambulance step, coughing quietly into his elbow. A paramedic wrapped a light dressing around a small burn on his forearm. Another examined the back of his neck. The air outside felt clearer, but the smoke odor still clung to his clothes and skin. "Try to take slow breaths," the paramedic said. "Your lungs are irritated. You were inside for a while." Michael nodded, eyes half closed. He could still feel the heat and see the haze of the smoke in his mind. He reached up and wiped sweat from his forehead. His hair was damp. Across the driveway, the old woman lay on a stretcher, paramedics working around her. He heard short instructions. "Check her pulse again and get that mask adjusted." They spoke calmly but firmly, as if time mattered, but panic had no place here. He spotted a police officer stepping onto the lawn, shining a flashlight around. The officer approached a few neighbors, asking quick questions. Another officer joined him, both scanning the crowd and the scene. The house still smoked, though the open window he'd broken was now surrounded by firefighters spraying water inside. The sound of rushing water and cracking wood mixed with distant sirens. A neighbor in a blue polo shirt walked over to the ambulance. He stopped a few feet away from Michael, hands in his pockets. He looked unsure. You saved her, right?" the neighbor asked. He avoided eye contact, glancing at the ground. Michael cleared his throat, wincing at the dryness. "I don't know if I saved her. I pulled her out. She's breathing, I think." He coughed again. The paramedic handed him a bottle of water. Michael took a sip, grateful. The neighbor nodded. Well, thanks. I wouldn't have done that," he said, looking nervous. It was dangerous. I'm glad you did it." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Michael shrugged. He didn't feel heroic. He just did what he thought was right. "I'm just glad she's alive," he said. He glanced over at the old woman. One of the paramedics raised a hand, signaling something to a colleague. It looked like she was stable enough to be moved. They were getting ready to transport her. The neighbor took a step back. "I should let you rest," he said. "Anyway, thanks." He turned and disappeared into the small crowd that had formed near the sidewalk. The police officer with the flashlight approached next, stopping in front of Michael. "Evening," the officer said. His voice was calm but businesslike. "We got some information that you went inside before the fire department got here. That true?" Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, officer. I was delivering a package down the street. I saw smoke. I heard something inside. I found the window. She was trapped." He spoke between quiet coughs, trying to sound clear. The officer took out a small notepad. "What's your name?" he asked. "Michael Johnson." The officer wrote it down. "You work for a delivery company?" the officer asked, glancing at his uniform shirt, now dirty and smelling of smoke. Michael nodded. "Yes, sir. I was on my last stop." The officer looked him over, then glanced at the ambulance crew. "You hurt?" "Just burns on my arm and some smoke inhalation, I think." The officer nodded. "You got her out. That's something. You should let the paramedics check you out properly." He lowered his notepad and met Michael's eyes. "We might need a statement later. Don't go anywhere yet, okay?" "Sure," Michael said. He had nowhere else to go. He didn't have the energy to drive off. His mind drifted to his home, to his mother who lived out of state, and to the bills waiting for him. He felt a brief wave of worry, but he pushed it aside. He was here now, and that was all he could focus on. The paramedics started rolling the old woman's stretcher toward an ambulance. They moved carefully. She lay there with an oxygen mask over her face. A paramedic checked her vitals and called out numbers to another at the rear of the ambulance. The back doors opened with a metallic click, and they guided the stretcher inside. Michael watched, feeling a knot in his stomach. He wanted to know if she'd be okay. He didn't know her name, who she was, or if she had family. He realized he hadn't asked anyone about that. Maybe it wasn't his place. He had done what he could. A firefighter walked by, helmet in hand, and gave Michael a nod. "Good job in there," he said simply, then continued on. Michael nodded back, unsure what to say. A few minutes passed. The paramedic working on Michael pressed a stethoscope to his back and asked him to breathe in and out. Michael complied, feeling a rasp in his chest. "You need to get that looked at," the paramedic said. "You'll probably be fine, but go see a doctor if the cough doesn't clear up." Michael agreed. He wasn't about to argue. At least the immediate danger was over. He noticed some neighbors drifting away now that the main excitement was winding down. Some still lingered, whispering and pointing, but most seemed ready to return to their routines. The firefighters had reduced the flames. Water ran down the driveway, pooling near the curb. A smell of wet ash filled the air. The police officers seemed more relaxed, talking quietly among themselves. The crisis had passed. It felt strange how quickly things settled. A younger neighbor in a gray hoodie approached Michael, hands in his pockets, looking uneasy. "I saw what you did," he said quietly. "I mean, you actually went in. I wouldn't have expected that." Michael glanced up. "Just did what I thought I should do," he said. He didn't want to dwell on it. His body ached and he wanted to shower and sleep. The young man nodded and backed off without saying more. The officer with the flashlight returned with a partner. The partner, a woman with a clipboard, addressed Michael. "Mr. Johnson, we're going to need a brief statement about what happened. Could you walk us through what you saw and did?" Michael sighed and nodded. "Sure," he said. He took another sip of water, clearing his throat. He explained how he'd smelled smoke, seen the smoke from the house, and decided to investigate. He told them how he tried the door, couldn't get in, and ended up breaking the window. He described finding the old woman on the floor and carrying her out. He kept it simple, just the facts. The female officer wrote notes as he spoke. When he finished, she gave a short nod. "Thanks," she said. "We appreciate it. We might need to contact you if we have any follow-up questions. Can you give us your contact info?" Michael provided his phone number and address. The officer noted it down. "We'll be in touch if needed," she said. "You can leave if you want. unless the paramedics need you to stay." "I think I'm good to go," Michael said, looking at the paramedic. The paramedic nodded. They had patched his burns and advised him on what to do if his symptoms got worse. Michael stood, legs feeling a bit shaky. He walked slowly toward his van, passing by a few neighbors who parted to let him through. He looked up at the darkening sky. It was early evening, the sun mostly gone. The lights from emergency vehicles created strange shadows on the asphalt. He slipped into the driver's seat, inhaled, and let the seat hold his weight for a moment. As he started the van, he noticed that package he was supposed to deliver still lying on the sidewalk where he'd left it. He got out, picked it up, and put it on his passenger seat. He'd figure out what to do about that later. Maybe he'd deliver it tomorrow. He doubted anyone would blame him for being late. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the ambulance carrying the old woman pull away. He hoped she'd be okay. He didn't know anything about her, not even her name. Yet he had pulled her out of that burning house. Life was strange sometimes. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb, careful to avoid the cluster of emergency vehicles. As he drove down the quiet street, he noticed people turning back to their homes, some still murmuring to each other. He wondered if they would remember what happened tomorrow, or if it would fade away as just another odd event. He didn't care much. He had done what he could. Michael headed back toward his own modest neighborhood. He needed a shower, something to eat, and some rest. He had been scared, but it was over now. Tomorrow he'd deal with his regular life again. Bills, work, phone calls. Everything would return to normal or something close to normal. For now, he just wanted to go home and breathe cleaner air. He kept his window cracked open, letting the night breeze in. His arm stung a bit from the burns, but he tried to ignore it. He reminded himself that he got out alive, and so did she. That was enough. Michael woke up feeling sore. His arm hurt where the burns were bandaged. He sat up in bed, blinking at the dull light that slipped in through the small window of his rented home. The clock showed it was just after 6 in the morning. He usually started his day even earlier, but his body felt stiff. He tried to remember if he had set an alarm. He hadn't. He had just passed out as soon as he got home the night before. He rose and shuffled to the bathroom. He turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were still a bit red from the smoke. He touched the bandage on his forearm, wincing a little. The skin underneath felt tender. He moved to the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out a small container of leftovers. He ate quietly, thinking about the old woman he had pulled from the fire. He didn't know what happened after she was taken to the hospital. Was she stable? He figured she must have been, or someone would have contacted him. Or maybe not. He was just a random guy who helped out. He knew her family would handle it from now on. His phone vibrated on the table. He picked it up and saw a text from his boss. It read, "Heard about what happened. You okay? Let me know if you need the day off." Michael typed back, "I'm fine, I'll be in." He needed the hours. He couldn't afford to stay home. He finished his food, put on his work shirt, now clean, a spare one he kept folded in his dresser, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, a hint cooler than the previous day. He crossed the small front yard and got into his delivery van. He ran a hand over the steering wheel and sighed. He wondered if people at work would treat him differently now. He doubted it. Most would just shrug it off. He was still just the guy who delivered packages. He started the engine and pulled onto the main road. Traffic was normal. Cars moved slowly through the morning commute. He tapped the steering wheel, checking his first delivery address on the dashboard console. It was in a gated community across town. He remembered how sometimes security guards gave him a hard time. He tried not to think about that. He just wanted a normal day. On the way, his phone rang through the van's speaker system. His mother's number lit up the screen. He answered, careful to keep his voice steady. "Hi, Mom." "Michael." his mother said. She sounded tired, as always. She asked how he was. He told her he was fine. He did not mention the fire or the rescue. She had enough worries. She was asking about money for her medications. He assured her that he was working hard and would send something soon. After a few minutes, he ended the call and sighed. He needed a better job, more stable pay. Yesterday's events wouldn't magically solve that. He reached the gated community around 8. The guard waved him through after checking his ID. Today, the guard seemed friendlier, actually making eye contact. Maybe the guy had heard something. Michael pretended not to notice. He drove slowly through the quiet, manicured streets and found the address. He carried the small box to the front door, rang the bell, and waited. A woman answered, phone in her hand. She looked at Michael's uniform and then at his bandaged arm. She frowned slightly. "What happened to your arm?" she asked. "Burned it," Michael said simply, holding out the package. She signed for it and looked at him again, as if expecting more detail. He didn't offer any. She nodded, took the package, and closed the door. Michael turned back to his van, rolling his eyes. People were always curious, but he didn't feel like explaining. He drove to the next address, another quiet street. When he stepped out this time, a landscaper trimming hedges looked up and recognized him. The landscaper was the same neighbor who had been at the scene the previous day, the one who told him not to go inside. The man straightened up and cleared his throat. "Hey," the man said, turning off his hedge trimmer. "I remember you from yesterday, with the fire." Michael paused, holding a large envelope. "Yeah, I guess you were there," he said. The landscaper wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'm sorry I yelled at you. That was crazy what you did. Brave, I mean. I just didn't know what was happening." Michael nodded. "It's fine. I get it, you didn't know me." The landscaper shifted his weight. "The old woman's name is Eleanor," he said. "I heard from someone that she's stable at the hospital. Just thought you might want to know." Michael felt a small relief in his chest. "Thanks, that's good to hear." He turned and walked up to the door, delivered the envelope, and came back to his van. The landscaper had moved on, bending over a flower bed, as if the conversation never happened. The day wore on like that. A few people asked about his arm. One or two hinted they had seen something on local social media about a delivery driver rescuing an elderly resident. Michael played it down. He didn't want a spotlight. He just wanted to finish his shift and go home. After lunch, he parked at a gas station to use the restroom and grabbed a bottle of water. The cashier gave him a curious look. "Aren't you the guy?" She trailed off. Michael sighed. "I don't know," he said, placing the water on the counter. "I'm just working." She shrugged, rang him up, and handed him his change. "Have a good day," she said, but her tone was uncertain. He got back into his van. His arm throbbed and his shoulders were tense. He tried to stretch his neck. He was tired. Maybe he should have taken the day off. Still, it was too late now. He only had a few more deliveries to make. He checked the next address. It was another wealthy area. He thought about how sometimes people looked at him with suspicion, as if he didn't belong in those neighborhoods. Yesterday, he had broken into a house there, even if to save someone. He wondered if that would change how people saw him. Probably not. He pulled up to a 2-story house with a long driveway. He carried a large package to the door and rang the bell. A man answered, looked Michael up and down, and signed quickly. The man didn't smile or say thanks. He just closed the door. Business as usual, Michael thought. Nothing really changed. Toward the end of his shift, he got a call from his boss again. He answered it on speaker while driving. "Michael, hey," his boss said. "I've been hearing things. Customers calling in, talking about how you saved someone. Is that real?" Michael frowned. "Yeah, it happened last night." His boss sounded surprised. That's wild. Are you okay? I'm fine, Michael said. Just a few burns. The boss hesitated. Look, I know we don't pay you much. You don't have benefits. But if you need time off, I can give you a couple of days. Not paid, but still. Michael gripped the wheel. No, I need the hours, he said. Thanks, though. All right, if you say so, the boss replied. Take care of yourself. Let me know if anything changes. Michael hung up and tried not to think about it. It was just another day. He wondered if he'd ever get out of this routine. Probably not anytime soon. He finished his last delivery around 5 in the afternoon. He decided to drive home a different route, one that avoided passing by the scene of the fire. He didn't want to see the house again right now. It was enough to know he had done what he could. If the old woman was stable, that was good news. Maybe she had a family. Maybe they were grateful. When he got home, he stepped inside and locked the door. His small living room was quiet. He dropped onto the couch, careful not to bend his burned arm too much. The bandage itched. He'd have to change it soon. He stared at the blank TV screen. He felt empty, as if all that drama the night before hadn't changed much. He was still broke, still struggling, still in the same place. He got up, went to the bathroom, and gently peeled back the bandage to inspect the burn. It looked red and raw. He'd need some ointment and clean gauze. He washed it carefully, biting his lip at the sting. When he finished, he wrapped it again with fresh bandages he'd bought weeks ago in case he ever got hurt on the job. It seemed he put them to good use now. The phone rang again. He grabbed it, hoping it wasn't more questions. It was a friend who worked with him occasionally. The friend asked if the rumors were true. Michael confirmed it. The friend whistled softly. Man, that's something, he said. You should be proud. Michael shrugged to himself. I did what anyone would do, he said. Not anyone, the friend said. Anyway, take it easy. See you tomorrow at work. Michael hung up and tossed the phone on the coffee table. He felt restless. He turned on the TV for background noise. News reports flickered by. He flipped through channels, stopping on a local station that showed a brief segment about a house fire in a wealthy neighborhood. They mentioned that a resident had been rescued by a passing delivery driver. They didn't show his face, just the damaged house and a statement from the fire chief praising the quick action. Michael watched for a minute, then turned it off. It felt strange to see it on TV. He wondered if the old woman's family had seen it too. Maybe they were relieved. Maybe they didn't even know who he was. He didn't expect anyone to show up at his door, thanking him or offering him anything. Life didn't work that way. He sat there a while longer, feeling the tightness in his chest ease a bit, now that he wasn't breathing smoke. He had survived that situation. He had done his job today. Tomorrow would be the same. He got up to find something to eat, a simple meal to end the day. Another day behind him. Michael woke up even earlier than usual. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling for a few minutes, deciding if he should get up or give himself another hour of rest. His arm still hurt, though the pain had lessened a bit overnight. Eventually he got up, took a short shower, and changed the bandage on his arm before dressing in clean clothes. In the kitchen, he brewed cheap coffee and ate a piece of bread. He was low on groceries, but he couldn't afford a big shopping trip right now. As he sipped the hot coffee, he wondered if the old woman was still in the hospital. He had no way to check. He only knew her first name, Eleanor, overheard from that landscaper. He doubted he'd ever see her again. She had a family, probably people with money who would take care of her. He left home and drove off in his van, heading for the delivery warehouse to pick up the day's shipments. The streets were quiet at this hour. He turned on the radio, but nothing caught his interest. He turned it off and drove in silence, focusing on the road. The warehouse lot was half empty. He parked and went inside to get his route details. Inside, a co-worker approached him near the loading dock. "Hey, heard you're a hero now," the co-worker said, grinning. He was a tall guy with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Michael shrugged. People keep saying that. I'm just doing my job. Your job is delivering packages, man, not running into burning houses, the coworker joked. Come on, that's big. The boss is talking about it. Everyone's curious. I bet you'll get a raise. Michael snorted. I doubt it. Maybe he'll let me keep my job. He grabbed his route sheet, checked the orders, and started loading boxes into his van. The coworker helped without commenting further. Michael preferred it that way. He didn't want to make a scene. The first half of his day was uneventful. He delivered packages to various neighborhoods. Most people acted the same as ever. Some recognized him from the local news reports, nodding or giving a thumbs up. He'd offer a brief smile, say thanks, and move on. He wasn't comfortable being recognized. Around lunchtime, he stopped at a cheap sandwich place. He ate in his van, rolling down the window to let in some fresh air. He checked his phone. There were a few text messages from friends asking how he was doing. He replied with short answers saying he was fine. He had no big news. Life went on. After finishing his meal, he started the engine and drove to the next address. It was back in a familiar area, near where the fire happened. He found himself glancing in that direction, remembering the night he broke the window and crawled inside the burning house. The memory made his stomach tighten. He shook it off and focused on the next delivery. When the day ended, Michael drove home tired. He parked on the street in front of his place. As he approached his house, he noticed something strange. There was a car parked in front that didn't belong to any of his neighbors. It was a sleek, expensive-looking sedan with tinted windows. He frowned. Cars like that didn't usually show up here. He walked up his short driveway and fished for his keys. As he reached the front door, he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me?" a man said. Michael turned and saw a well-dressed man in a suit stepping out of the sedan. The man held up a hand in a friendly gesture. Standing on the passenger side of the car was an older woman leaning on a cane. She wore a light jacket, and her hair was neatly combed. Michael froze, recognizing her face. It was Eleanor, the old woman from the fire. She looked a bit pale but stable. She had bandages peeking out from the collar of her jacket. She watched Michael with a steady, curious expression. The man cleared his throat. "Are you Michael Johnson?" he asked. Michael nodded, feeling his heartbeat quicken. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" The man stepped forward, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm David, Eleanor's son. This is my mother, Eleanor. She wanted to see you." Michael looked at Eleanor. She smiled faintly. "I wanted to meet you properly," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "You saved my life." Michael blinked, not sure what to say. He scratched the back of his neck. "I'm glad you're okay," he managed. He wondered how they found him. Maybe the police or the fire department gave them his contact info. David opened the back door of the sedan and pulled out a small folder. He held it at his side. "I hope we're not bothering you," he said. "We know this is unexpected." Michael shook his head. "No, it's fine. Do you want to come inside?" He glanced at his small home, feeling suddenly self-conscious about how plain it was. Eleanor nodded. "Just for a moment," she said. "We won't stay long. I just need to tell you something." Michael unlocked the door and held it open. He stepped inside and moved aside some mail and a pair of shoes near the entrance. The house was modest, a small living room with an old couch, a tiny kitchen visible through a doorway. He hoped they wouldn't judge him. He offered them seats. Eleanor settled onto the couch slowly, and David stood near her. Michael remained standing, unsure if he should sit. He decided to stay on his feet. "Would you like some water?" he asked, feeling awkward. Eleanor shook her head. "No, thank you, dear." She took a breath. "I don't remember much from that night. I remember darkness, heat, not being able to breathe. Then I remember someone lifting me up and getting me outside." She looked at Michael. "That was you." Michael nodded slowly. "I was just there at the time. I saw the smoke and went in." Eleanor frowned slightly. Not everyone would do that. Most would wait, be afraid, or think someone else would handle it. Michael shrugged. It was dangerous. I guess I didn't think much about that. I just heard someone inside. She reached out and lightly tapped David's hand. He held the folder out to Michael. "My family is grateful," David said. "You saved my mother's life. I don't know how to express our thanks properly, but we'd like to try." Michael looked at the folder but didn't take it. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice uncertain. He didn't understand what they were doing. Eleanor cleared her throat. "It's not about owing you. It's about recognizing what you did. You risked yourself for a stranger." Michael swallowed hard. He glanced at his modest furniture, the old TV, the worn carpet. He felt warm, uncertain. "I'm just glad you're all right," he said quietly. David opened the folder and pulled out a few sheets of paper. He handed them to Michael. "This is an offer of employment," he said. "I run a business. We're always looking for people with initiative and courage. It's a position as a trainee in our management department. Good starting salary, full benefits." Michael stared at the papers, not sure what to say. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. I'm a delivery driver," he said. "I don't have experience in that." David nodded. "We know. We're willing to train you. If you can handle that situation, we believe you can handle responsibilities at our company." Eleanor spoke up again. "If you don't want this, we understand. But I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity. Someone who acts like you did deserves a chance." She looked around his small home. "You could have a better life. You've earned it." Michael's chest tightened. He looked down at the papers. The terms were written clearly. The salary was more than he'd ever earned. There were health benefits, something he lacked now. He thought of his mother who needed expensive surgery. This could solve so many problems. It felt like a dream, and he worried he might wake up and find none of this was real. "Why?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. "Why would you do this for me?" David stepped closer, speaking calmly. "Because you saved my mother's life, and because I respect someone who can do something so hard in a moment of crisis. I think people like that are valuable in any organization. It's as simple as that." Michael's hand trembled slightly as he held the papers. He looked at Eleanor. She nodded encouragingly. He could see sincerity in her eyes. They weren't doing this as a publicity stunt or as some sort of trick. He didn't know them well, but he felt their honesty. He swallowed again. "I don't know what to say. This is generous. I need to think about it." "Of course," David said. "We don't need an answer right now. Take your time." Eleanor leaned forward a bit. "We'll also take care of your mother's medical bills. That's something I insist on. Consider it a token of my gratitude." Michael's eyes widened. He pressed his lips together. He had no words. Nobody had ever offered him something like this. He wanted to say yes immediately, but he also felt cautious. It was too good to be true. Yet here they were, standing in his living room, calmly offering him a chance to change his life. "Thank you," he managed. "I mean it. I'll consider it, and I really appreciate it." Eleanor smiled gently. "That's all we ask." David put a business card on the coffee table. "Call me anytime. My personal number is there. If you have questions, or if you decide to accept, we'll get you started." Michael nodded, his throat dry. He still couldn't fully process it. He watched as Eleanor pushed herself up slowly using her cane. David moved to help, but she waved him off. She looked Michael in the eye. "You gave me my life," she said quietly. "I hope we can give you something in return." Michael stood frozen by the door as they left. He watched them climb into the sedan and drive off down the street. He closed the door slowly and locked it. He turned around and looked at his small living room, still holding the papers in his hand. He sat down on the couch, breathing slowly, trying to steady himself. He hadn't expected this. He thought life would just go on as before, but now there was a new path waiting for him. He looked at the papers again, reading the details carefully. Full benefits, a real salary. He pictured his mother's face when he told her he could pay for her surgery. Maybe things could change after all. Michael sat on his couch, still holding the papers that David had given him. He read through the job offer again, line by line. It sounded legitimate. The position was entry-level management trainee, with training provided, and the pay was far above what he earned as a delivery driver. The benefits included health insurance, paid vacation days, and even some form of retirement plan. It felt like something he would never have imagined for himself. He glanced at the business card that David left. He wondered if he should call right now. Probably too soon. They said to take his time. His stomach rumbled. It was getting late, and he hadn't eaten dinner. He stood, walked into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. Not much there. He grabbed a half-empty carton of milk and smelled it. It was still okay. He poured some cereal into a bowl and ate standing up. The cereal tasted stale, but he hardly noticed. He kept thinking about the offer. He tried to picture himself behind a desk or in an office, doing something other than lifting boxes all day. He finished eating, washed the bowl, and dried it with a threadbare towel. He felt restless, pacing the small living room. A new job meant quitting his current one. It meant telling his boss he was leaving. Would his boss even care? The delivery company paid him little and gave no real prospects for advancement. This new job could change his life. He could pay for his mother's treatment without going into more debt. He could move out of this cramped house. He could maybe fix his old car or even buy a better one someday. But it still felt unreal. He had met Eleanor and David only once. Maybe they were just grateful. He shouldn't doubt their intentions too much. They seemed sincere. He remembered the look in Eleanor's eyes, how calm and serious she was. She didn't come across as someone who played games, and David had been straightforward, no fancy words, just the facts. He set the papers down on the coffee table and decided he should call his mother. It was late, but she was usually up. He dialed her number and waited. "Michael, is that you?" she answered. "Yeah, Mom, it's me," he said. He tried to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to sound too excited yet. "I have some news. Good news, I think." She coughed softly. "What is it? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "Remember I told you I'd try to figure out how to pay for your surgery? Well, something unexpected happened. I got a job offer, a really good one. It could cover everything." She sounded surprised. "A job offer? From who?" Michael hesitated. "From someone I helped out recently. Long story short, I saved an elderly lady from a fire. Her family wants to help me start a new career. They offered me a position and said they'd pay for your surgery. All of it." There was silence on the line. Then his mother spoke in a careful tone. "Michael, that sounds too good to be true. Are you sure they're serious?" "I think so," he said. "They came to my house, gave me all the details, showed me the paperwork. They didn't ask for anything in return except that I consider working for them." His mother took a long breath. "If this is real, then I'm so happy for you. You deserve a break, Michael. You've worked so hard. Just be careful. Make sure you read everything. Don't sign anything without understanding it first." "I will," he promised. "I just wanted you to know. If I take this job, I can pay for your treatment. We can schedule your surgery and not worry about the bills." She sniffed, probably holding back tears. "That's wonderful, son. I'm proud of you. Whatever you decide, I trust your judgment." After a few more minutes of talking, he hung up. He felt more confident now. His mother's trust mattered. He turned off the TV, which was playing quietly in the background, and headed to bed. He left the paperwork on the coffee table. He'd look at it again tomorrow with fresh eyes. The next morning, Michael woke early as always. He sat at the kitchen table, sipped some coffee, and read the documents again. Everything looked official. He recognized the company's name. It was a medium-sized firm specializing in logistics and distribution. David seemed to run a branch that handled large contracts with various suppliers. Michael's role would be to learn the ropes and eventually supervise a team. It made sense that David, who likely dealt with emergency planning and critical deadlines, would appreciate someone who kept calm under pressure. Michael still felt nervous about stepping into a completely new role, but he told himself that he learned fast. He had learned how to navigate complicated delivery routes without much training. He could adapt. By late morning, he still hadn't decided. He needed to call David, or at least let them know he was thinking it over. He picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. David answered after 2 rings. "Hello, Michael." "Hi, David. I'm calling about the offer you left with me," Michael said. He cleared his throat. "I'm interested. I just wanted to confirm a few details." "Sure," David said. "What would you like to know?" Michael asked about start dates, training periods, and benefits. David answered everything patiently. They would start him as soon as he was ready. The pay was as stated. The health benefits kicked in immediately. They'd also cover his mother's surgery costs, arranged through their corporate health network. Michael couldn't think of any more questions. It all sounded straightforward. "I think I'd like to accept," Michael said finally. "Great," David said. He sounded genuinely pleased. "Why don't we arrange a meeting at the office next week? We can sign the paperwork and get you started." "Sounds good," Michael said. He gave David his email address so they could send him the location and time. They ended the call on a warm note. Michael lowered the phone and stared at the wall for a moment. That was it. He had just accepted a new job. He would have to quit his current one. He felt a bit guilty about leaving so abruptly, but he owed it to himself and his mother to take this chance. He got dressed and drove to his delivery warehouse. It was still early enough to catch his boss before the day's routes were fully assigned. He parked and walked inside. The boss was in the office drinking coffee and going over paperwork. "Hey, boss," Michael said, knocking on the doorframe. The boss looked up. "Michael, morning, what's up?" Michael took a breath. "I need to give you my notice. I'm leaving the company. I got another job offer." The boss frowned. "Leaving? After all this time?" He tapped a pen on the desk. "What kind of job is it?" "A management trainee position," Michael said. "Better pay, benefits, a real career path." The boss narrowed his eyes, then shrugged. "Can't say I'm surprised. You did something big the other day. People noticed. Can't blame you for moving on to something better." He sipped his coffee. "When's your last day?" "I can work a few more days if you need, or I can leave now. I know I don't have a contract that requires notice." The boss waved a hand. "Nah, it's fine. You can wrap up whenever you like. We'll manage." He looked a bit disappointed, but not angry. "Good luck, Michael. Take care." "Thanks," Michael said. He left the office feeling lighter. He didn't have much to pack up, just a few personal items in his locker. He took them and left without much fanfare. A co-worker saw him and asked what was going on. Michael explained he was leaving. The co-worker slapped him on the shoulder, congratulating him. News traveled fast. Soon everyone would know he was gone. He drove home, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. This was a huge change. He wouldn't be delivering packages anymore. He would be stepping into an office, learning new skills, and getting paid enough to help his mother properly. He wondered what it would feel like to have health insurance and not worry about medical bills. He wondered if he could find a nicer apartment closer to his new job. When he got home, he tried to tidy up a bit. He put away some old junk mail, straightened the small stack of dishes, and even wiped down the kitchen counter. The place still looked shabby, but at least it was clean. He realized he might not live here much longer if things worked out well. He picked up his phone and called his mother again. she answered, sounding more awake this time. He told her he accepted the job. She sounded relieved. That's wonderful, Michael. I'm so happy for you. This means we can schedule my surgery, right? Yeah, he said. They'll take care of the costs. I should have all the paperwork next week. Then we can set it up. She thanked him over and over. He smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. Finally, something positive. Finally, a chance to break out of the cycle that kept him struggling month after month. After the call, he sat down and tried to imagine what his new life would be like. He would have co-workers in an office environment. He would learn about supply chains, inventory management, or whatever David planned to teach him. It was all unfamiliar, but he was willing to learn. He had to prove that they made the right choice giving him this opportunity. He looked at the TV, then at the clock on the wall. The day felt different. He didn't have to wake up at dawn tomorrow to run deliveries. He could take a few days to rest before starting his training. He realized he hadn't taken a proper break in a long time. He decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood, stretch his legs, and clear his head. As he stepped outside, he noticed the sky looked bright. Neighbors passed by, some recognizing him, some not. He gave a small nod or a wave. He wasn't just the delivery guy anymore. He was moving on. His arm still hurt, but it would heal. He thought about Eleanor, hoping she was resting and recovering well. He made a mental note to thank her again when he saw her at the office or somewhere else. She and David had done more than just repay him. They had given him a chance to change his life for the better. Michael woke up before sunrise, but this time he didn't feel the usual dread of another grueling day driving around in his delivery van. He had a new direction now. He made a simple breakfast, just coffee and toast, and got dressed in the best clothes he had, a pair of clean pants and a collared shirt. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He was aware he didn't have fancy office attire yet, but he figured it would be good enough for a first meeting. David had said to come in this week to finalize the paperwork and start training. He checked the address David had emailed. It wasn't far from where he used to pick up deliveries, but in a nicer area. He locked up his small home and got in his old car. The engine rattled a bit, but it still ran. He had a feeling that with a steady paycheck and benefits, he might be able to upgrade one day. Traffic was light. He reached the company's office building in about 20 minutes. It was a medium-sized, modern building with tinted glass windows and a small, clean parking lot. He found a spot and walked inside. The lobby was quiet. A receptionist looked up from behind a desk. She wore a neat blouse and smiled politely. "Good morning. Can I help you?" she asked. "I have an appointment with David," Michael said. "I'm Michael Johnson." She checked a computer screen. "Right, Mr. Johnson. He's expecting you. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. His office is at the end of the hallway." Michael thanked her, stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. Inside, he saw his reflection in the stainless steel door. He adjusted his collar, took a breath, and waited. When the doors opened, he followed the hallway. Each office door had a small nameplate. He found David's name at the end, as promised. The office door was slightly open. He knocked lightly. "Come in," David's voice called. Michael stepped inside. David stood up from behind a desk and extended his hand. "Good morning, Michael," he said, shaking hands firmly. "Glad you made it. How are you feeling today?" "A bit nervous," Michael admitted, "but ready to get started." David smiled. "No need to be nervous. We're going to walk you through everything step by step." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit down." Michael sat and looked around. The office was organized with shelves of binders and a few framed certificates. There was a computer on the desk, a phone, and a few files. David opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of forms. "We need your signature on these documents," he said. "Your employment contract, your health insurance enrollment, your direct deposit form, and a few company policies. I'll explain each one as you go." Michael took the pen David offered and started signing where indicated. David explained the details: the salary, the schedule, the training timeline. He mentioned that the first month would be mostly learning the company's systems and procedures. After that, Michael would shadow an experienced manager and gradually take on responsibilities. While Michael signed the last form, there was a knock at the door. David said, "Come in." The door opened and Eleanor stepped inside, leaning on her cane. Michael stood up immediately. "Eleanor," David said warmly, "I didn't expect you so early." "I wanted to see how Michael was settling in," she said. She looked healthier than before, a bit more color in her face. She nodded at Michael. "Good morning. How does it feel to be starting something new?" Michael smiled slightly. "It feels good," he said. "Thank you again for the opportunity." Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. "No need to thank me. You earned this. I'm glad to see you here." She looked at David. "I'll let you get back to it. I just stopped by to say hello." She gave a small nod and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Michael sat down again, feeling more at ease now. If Eleanor could show up here, it meant she was recovering well. That was one less thing to worry about. David folded his hands on the desk. "Let's get you set up with a workstation. We have a small training room where you'll spend most of your first week. You'll learn our software, how we track inventory, how we schedule deliveries, and how we deal with clients. After that, I'll introduce you to some team members." Michael followed David out into the hallway. They walked past a few offices and into a room with several desks and computers. A man in a button-up shirt and jeans approached them. "Michael, this is Thomas," David said. "He's going to handle your onboarding. Thomas, this is Michael, our new trainee." Thomas nodded. "Nice to meet you." He pointed at a desk near a window. "That's yours for now. I've got a checklist of tasks to go through with you. We'll start with simple stuff, logging into the system, exploring our database, and understanding the basic workflow." Michael sat at the desk, and Thomas began explaining the login process. Michael followed along, typing his username and temporary password, and watched as the system loaded. It felt strange to be using an office computer instead of a delivery scanner or a route sheet. He asked a few questions about the interface. Thomas answered patiently, showing him how to access different modules. A few hours passed quietly. Michael took notes on a pad provided by Thomas. He learned how to check orders, how to see which trucks went out each day, how to track shipments. It reminded him of his old job in some ways, but now he was on the other side. Instead of driving the routes, he was managing them. Around noon, David popped in and suggested they break for lunch. Thomas nodded and handed Michael a small employee badge so he could come and go easily. Michael followed them down to a cafeteria on the first floor. It was a small but clean space with a few tables and chairs, a coffee machine, and a fridge. Employees brought their own lunches or ordered delivery from nearby places. Michael hadn't brought anything fancy. He had a sandwich and an apple in a brown bag. Thomas had a simple salad. David had a wrap and a bottle of water. They ate quietly for a moment. Then David said, "So, Michael, how's it going so far? Any questions, any concerns?" Michael shook his head. "It's going well. There's a lot to learn, but it makes sense once I see how everything connects." Thomas agreed. "It can be a bit overwhelming at first, but you'll get the hang of it soon. Once you understand the system, the rest falls into place." Michael nodded, feeling more confident. He noticed a few other employees glancing his way, curious about the new guy. Some nodded or said hello. He nodded back, keeping it casual. After lunch, they returned to the training room. Thomas introduced Michael to a few simulation exercises, having him track a mock delivery, solve a scheduling conflict, and note any issues. Michael asked a few questions and got comfortable navigating the system. By the end of the day, his head felt full of new information, but not in a bad way. He felt productive and challenged. David checked in before leaving and told Michael he was doing fine. "Go home, rest, and we'll pick it up again tomorrow," David said. "If you need anything, just let us know." Michael packed up his notes and headed out to the parking lot. The sun was still up, and the day felt less draining than his old delivery job. Driving home, he thought about how different this was. He would have to buy some new clothes eventually, something more appropriate for the office. He could afford it now. He also thought about calling his mother again and telling her how the day went. When he got home, he heated up some leftovers. While he ate, he imagined how his life would look in a few months. He would be trained, maybe even promoted again if he worked hard. He could get his mother's surgery scheduled soon. He would call her tomorrow to give her a time frame. He would also start looking at apartments closer to the office, something nicer than his current place. After dinner, he took a quick shower and changed the bandage on his arm. The burn was healing slowly, just like his life was improving bit by bit. He sat on the couch and turned on the TV for a few minutes, but he couldn't focus on the shows. He kept thinking about the office, the tasks, and how different it all felt. He turned the TV off and got ready for bed. As he lay there in the darkness, he allowed himself a small feeling of pride. He had come a long way in just a few days. He was still the same person, but now he had a new chance. He would make the most of it. Michael arrived at the office early, about half an hour before his official start time. He took the elevator up to his floor, found his desk, and turned on the computer. The office was quiet, only a few people around. He decided to review the notes from the previous day, making sure he remembered the steps for checking orders and assigning them to different delivery routes. He wanted to be ready when Thomas came by with new instructions. As he went through his notes, the door opened. Thomas walked in carrying a mug of coffee. "You're early," Thomas said, sitting down at the desk next to Michael's. "Everything okay?" Michael nodded. "I just wanted to get a head start. Yesterday was a lot to take in. I figured reviewing wouldn't hurt." Thomas sipped his coffee. "Good idea. Today we'll go through more scenarios. We'll do some tasks related to inventory issues, maybe a few last-minute changes. You'll see that things never go perfectly. Trucks break down, clients call to reschedule, items get delayed. You have to adjust." Michael understood. His old job taught him that reality rarely followed the plan. At least now he would be the one solving the problems from the inside. He felt more in control. Around 9, David came by. "Morning, guys," he said. He leaned against a desk. "Michael, I spoke with Eleanor last night. She's doing better and wants to know if you need anything. Also, I made some calls to the hospital network. If you want to start arranging your mother's surgery, we can set that in motion." Michael sat up straighter. "Really? That would be great. My mother is waiting for me to confirm that we can afford it. If you can help me with the details, I'd appreciate it." David nodded. "After lunch, let's sit down in my office. We'll call the hospital together and figure out the paperwork. It should be straightforward with our insurance." Michael felt relieved. The sooner he got the surgery scheduled, the better. He thanked David, who headed off to another meeting, leaving Michael and Thomas to continue training. The morning passed quickly. Thomas showed Michael how to handle a scenario where a truck was running late. They simulated calling the client, updating the schedule, and reassigning some routes. Michael practiced making those changes in the system, double-checking that everything matched up. Thomas seemed pleased with how fast Michael picked things up. At noon, Michael took a quick break. He had packed another simple lunch. While he ate, a few co-workers approached, introducing themselves. A woman named Karen from the accounting department said hello and asked if he was settling in. A man named Jorge from dispatch said he'd heard good things about Michael's quick learning. It felt good to be welcomed. They didn't mention the fire or the rescue. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. Either way, Michael didn't want special treatment. He just wanted to be part of the team. After lunch, he went to David's office. David had a phone on speaker and a folder with some papers. "I got the hospital representative on hold," David said. "We'll confirm the coverage and schedule a date." Michael sat down, trying not to sound too eager. He answered a few of the representative's questions, his mother's full name, her address, the procedure she needed. David provided the company's insurance information. The representative confirmed that the cost would be covered. They discussed possible dates, and Michael picked one about a month away, giving his mother time to prepare and travel to the hospital if needed. When the call ended, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, David," he said quietly. "This means a lot." David waved it off. "We're glad to help. Let me know if you need anything else. You focus on learning your role here. The rest is taken care of." Michael left the office feeling better than he had in years. He could finally take care of his mother properly. He went back to the training room with a renewed sense of purpose. He worked through more practice exercises with Thomas, asking questions when he wasn't sure about something. Thomas said he was catching on faster than most new hires. That boosted Michael's confidence. In the late afternoon, Eleanor arrived on the floor, walking slowly but steadily with her cane. She came directly to Michael's desk. Thomas stepped aside, letting them talk privately. "Michael," Eleanor said, her voice calm, "David told me you started making arrangements for your mother's surgery. I'm happy we could assist." Michael stood, not wanting to talk down to her while sitting. "Eleanor, I don't know how to repay you. You and David have done more for me than I ever expected." She waved a hand. "You saved my life. I'm simply glad we could remove some obstacles from yours. I hope you find happiness and stability here." She glanced at the computer screen. "How is the work going?" "I'm learning," Michael said. "Thomas is a good teacher. Everyone's been helpful." Eleanor nodded. "Good. That's what I like to hear." She took a small step back, adjusting her cane. "I won't bother you for long. I just wanted to see how things were going. Let me know if you have any concerns." Michael thanked her again. She left quietly, greeting a few other employees as she passed. Michael noticed that people treated her with great respect, not just because she was the owner's mother, but probably because she was kind and straightforward. The rest of the afternoon was calm. Michael practiced a few more scenarios on his own, without Thomas's help. He wanted to prove he could solve issues independently. He ran into a minor problem when he tried to reassign a delivery to a truck that was out of service. He couldn't remember the correct step to update that truck's status. Instead of panicking, he reviewed his notes, found the step, and corrected the error. It felt good to solve it on his own. By the time the workday ended, Michael felt tired but satisfied. He packed up his notes and logged off the computer. Thomas said goodnight, reminding him that tomorrow they would introduce a new set of tasks related to supplier negotiations. Michael nodded, ready for the next challenge. On the drive home, Michael thought about how different his life was now. He used to dread each day, wondering if he could pay the bills, if he could help his mother, if he would ever move forward. Now he had a good job, medical coverage for his mother, and the chance to improve his skills. He felt more in control of his future. When he got home, he called his mother to tell her the surgery date was set. She was relieved and grateful, saying she would start making arrangements to travel to the hospital. She sounded calmer now, more hopeful. Michael changed clothes and made a simple dinner. He checked the bandage on his arm. The burn was healing well, no longer as painful as before. He thought about how that injury symbolized the risk he took that day. It was healing, just like his circumstances. After dinner, he decided to look online for business casual clothing. He had enough savings now, plus the upcoming salary, to afford a few decent shirts and pants. He found some options and placed an order, feeling a bit proud that he could do this without worrying about money as much. Before going to bed, he took a moment to look around his small home. He considered moving closer to the office in the near future. With a better job, he could afford a slightly nicer apartment, maybe one with more space and better lighting. For now, though, this place was fine. It reminded him of how far he'd come. He brushed his teeth, turned off the lights, and lay down. He felt no need to watch TV. His mind was calm. He replayed the day's events in his head, learning the system at work, arranging his mother's surgery, Eleanor's brief visit. He realized he no longer felt like he was stuck in the same place. He had a direction. Michael woke up earlier than usual. The sun was not fully up yet, and the room was quiet. He got dressed in his new work clothes, a pair of neatly pressed pants and a button-down shirt. He had bought them recently, feeling confident he could afford better attire now. The soft fabric felt different from the cheap uniforms he used to wear as a delivery driver. He fixed a quick breakfast, just coffee and a bowl of cereal. As he ate, he glanced around his apartment. He had decided to move closer to the office in the next couple of months. He had already checked a few places online. He wanted something with a better layout, maybe a small balcony. Now that he had a stable job and a better income, it was possible. When he arrived at the office, he stopped by the receptionist's desk. The receptionist greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Michael," she said. She seemed to know him by name now. He nodded and made his way to his desk in the training room. Thomas was there, checking emails and organizing some files. Thomas looked up. "Morning," he said. "We have a full schedule today. I'm going to show you how we handle end-of-month reporting. It's a bit more detailed, but I think you're ready." Michael sat down and turned on his computer. "I'm ready," he said. He had been working here for a few weeks now and felt more confident. He understood the software, knew the procedures, and had even suggested a small improvement in how deliveries were recorded. Thomas had praised his initiative. They spent the morning reviewing spreadsheets, generating reports, and verifying data. Michael asked a few questions and took notes. He wanted to be thorough, no shortcuts. He wanted to make sure he understood every step. Thomas guided him patiently. Around noon, David stopped by. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Good," Thomas said. "Michael is getting the hang of the reports." David nodded. "Great. Michael, do you have a minute to discuss something?" Michael stood and followed David to his office. Inside, David closed the door and pointed to a chair. "We've been watching your progress. You're learning fast. You handle problems well, you ask good questions, and you're reliable. I'm impressed." Michael felt a small surge of pride. "I'm just doing my best," he said simply. David opened a file on his desk. "We want to move you out of the training phase a bit earlier than planned. Instead of a full month of training, we think you're ready to start working with an actual team. We have a spot opening up in the distribution coordination group. You'd be helping manage daily schedules for a set of routes." Michael nodded. "That sounds good. I'm ready." David smiled. "Perfect. Starting next week, you'll report to Sarah. She manages that group. I'll introduce you to her this afternoon. She's looking forward to having you on board." Michael thanked him. After the meeting, he returned to his desk and let Thomas know about the change. Thomas grinned. "I knew they'd move you up fast," he said. "You didn't need a full training period." They finished the morning tasks and broke for lunch. In the cafeteria, Michael sat with a few co-workers. They talked about small things, the weather, traffic, and a new coffee shop that opened nearby. Michael felt comfortable among them, even though he was still somewhat new. No one treated him like an outsider. He was just another member of the team. After lunch, David introduced Michael to Sarah. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s with short hair and glasses. She smiled and shook Michael's hand. "I've heard good things about you," she said. "We'll start you off slowly, then increase your responsibilities as you settle in. We need someone who can keep calm when schedules change last minute." Michael nodded. "I'll do my best." For the rest of the afternoon, he followed Thomas's instructions, finishing some pending training exercises. Thomas wished him luck and said he'd still be around if Michael needed help later. Before heading home, Michael checked his phone. He had a text from his mother. The surgery was scheduled for next week. She had arranged everything and would travel to the hospital in a few days. Michael felt relieved. He sent her a quick reply telling her not to worry about costs. It was all covered. She thanked him, saying how grateful she was. Outside, the air felt fresh. He drove home thinking about the next steps. He would soon have a regular position with a team rather than just training. That meant he could start looking at apartments more seriously. He made a mental note to check listings after dinner. When he got home, he heated up some leftovers. While the food warmed, he reviewed the apartment options he had saved on his phone. One looked promising. A one-bedroom place near a small park, only a short drive from the office. He wrote down the landlord's number. After dinner, he called the landlord and arranged a viewing for the weekend. He felt a bit nervous but excited. He never thought he'd be able to upgrade his living situation so soon. Now he could. He changed into comfortable clothes and sat down on the couch. He called his mother to confirm the details of the hospital admission. She sounded calm, even hopeful. Her voice was steadier than usual. They discussed travel arrangements, and Michael assured her that when she recovered, he might even be able to visit or help her relocate to a better place. She said one thing at a time, and he agreed. He hung up and checked his bandaged arm. The burn had healed enough that he no longer needed a full bandage, just a light covering. He decided to remove it carefully and see how it looked. The skin was pinkish but seemed healthy. It would probably leave a scar. That was okay. It reminded him that sometimes taking a risk could lead to better outcomes. He thought about Eleanor. He hadn't spoken to her in a few days. She was probably busy or recovering further. Maybe he'd see her around the office again. He wanted to thank her once more. He realized he had done that many times, but it never felt like enough. The next morning, Michael arrived early at work again. He had a feeling this would become his routine. Arrive early, review tasks, be prepared. He liked feeling productive. Thomas greeted him and said he would help him transition to Sarah's team. Just after 9, Eleanor appeared on the floor. She was walking more steadily now, using the cane lightly. She spotted Michael and approached him. "How are you settling in?" she asked. Her tone was relaxed. "I'm doing well," Michael said. "David is moving me into a permanent position next week. My mother's surgery is scheduled, and everything is moving forward. I can't thank you enough." Eleanor nodded. "I'm glad. That's what we hoped for. You had the courage to act when it mattered. Now you have the opportunity to build something better for yourself and your family. We just opened a door. You're the one walking through it." Michael appreciated her directness. No grand speeches, just the facts. She told him to keep working hard and said she was proud of his progress. Then she walked off to talk to another employee, leaving Michael with a sense of satisfaction. After Eleanor left, Michael focused on his new tasks. He prepared reports, double-checked inventory logs, and practiced inputting data for Sarah's team. At lunchtime, he ate with a small group who liked discussing work strategies. They asked him about his background, and he mentioned he used to be a delivery driver. One of them said it must be interesting to see the other side now. Michael agreed. By the end of the day, he felt confident. He had made it through training faster than expected. He would soon handle real responsibilities, and he had a clear future ahead. He drove home without tension. Instead of worrying about bills and uncertainty, he thought about which day he should arrange to visit his mother after her surgery. That evening, he watched a bit of TV, something he hadn't done much of lately. The news showed a few local stories, none related to fires or rescues. It felt like that dramatic event was now part of his personal history, not something broadcast anymore. He was fine with that. He didn't need public attention. He had what mattered: a steady job, a path forward, and the ability to help his mother. Before going to bed, he reviewed the appointment to see the new apartment. He looked at the pictures again, imagining his furniture in there. He pictured a small desk by the window where he could check his work emails or plan the next day's tasks. He imagined a better kitchen, more spacious and well lit. He smiled to himself. He turned off the lights and lay in bed, arms crossed behind his head. He felt no pain in his arm, just a bit of tightness in the skin where the burn had healed. His life had taken a turn he never expected. He had walked into a burning house to save a stranger, and that single act changed everything. Now he belonged to a workplace where people respected him. He had financial security, medical coverage for his mother, and a real chance to move forward. He had no illusions that everything would be perfect. There would be challenges at work. He would have to keep learning, keep adapting. But he knew how to face difficulties. He had done it before, and now he had support from people who believed in him. He closed his eyes, feeling calm. Tomorrow would be another day of learning and building his future. That was enough. He slept soundly, without worrying about what came next. He was ready for it.